My name is Elara Sinclair, and I am 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood at a podium in front of 200 people at my stepmother's annual charity luncheon and read aloud from a document she never expected anyone to find. By the time I finished, her face had gone completely white. My father couldn't look at anyone in the room, and the woman who had spent 14 years erasing me from my own family was finally the one who felt invisible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really started. Before we go further, if you enjoy stories like this, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love connecting with all of you. Now let me take you back. I was 11 years old the first time I understood that something had shifted in my house. It was a Saturday in October, and my father, Gerald Sinclair, was helping my stepsister, Peyton, build a diorama for her 4th grade history project. They were at the dining room table surrounded by construction paper, glue sticks, and tiny clay figurines. My father was laughing. Actually laughing. He had this deep, warm laugh that used to fill every corner of our house when my mother was alive. After she died, I thought that laugh had died with her. But there it was again, spilling out of him like nothing had ever gone wrong, directed at a 9-year-old girl who had been in our lives for barely a year. I stood in the hallway holding my own homework, a book report on Bridge to Terabithia that was due Monday. I needed help with the conclusion. I'd been standing there for almost 5 minutes, waiting for a pause in their conversation, but the pause never came. "Dad," I finally said, "can you help me with my book report?" He didn't look up. "Ask Diane. She's better at that stuff." Diane was my stepmother. She had married my father 8 months after my mother, Rebecca, died of a brain aneurysm. 8 months. My mother's winter coat was still hanging in the hall closet when Diane moved her things in. I remember because Diane asked my father to remove it. "It's morbid, Gerald," she had said. "You can't keep a dead woman's coat by the front door." He removed it that same afternoon. Diane was not better at that stuff. Diane had no interest in helping me with anything. When I found her in the kitchen that evening and asked about the book report, she glanced at me over her glass of Pinot Grigio and said, "You're 11, Elara. Figure it out. You can't rely on other people for everything." I figured it out. I wrote a conclusion that my teacher called remarkable for someone your age. I brought the graded paper home, an A+, and left it on the counter for my father to see. He never mentioned it. But when Peyton got a B- on her diorama, he took her out for ice cream to celebrate. That was the year I started keeping a journal. Not a diary with feelings and crushes. A record. Dates, incidents, things that were said to me versus things that were said to Peyton. I didn't know why I was doing it at the time. I just knew that something was unfair, and I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. By the time I was 14, the journal was 200 pages long. My mother died on March 3rd. I was 10. It happened without warning. She woke up with a headache, told my father she was going to lie down, and never got up. The aneurysm ruptured at 2:47 inches the afternoon while I was at school learning long division. My father picked me up early. I knew something was wrong because he was wearing the tie he only wore to important meetings, and his eyes were swollen. "She's gone, baby," he said in the car. "Mommy's gone." I didn't cry for 3 days. I think my brain simply refused to process it. On the 4th day, I found one of her sweaters in the laundry basket. It still smelled like her. Vanilla and something faintly floral. I buried my face in it and sobbed until my ribs hurt. My father grieved too, but differently. He grieved by filling the silence. Within weeks, there were people over for dinner. Colleagues from his insurance firm, neighbors, old college friends. He couldn't stand being alone with the quiet. I think the quiet reminded him of her. Diane appeared at one of those dinners. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, confident and polished with auburn hair. She straightened every morning, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought Peyton, her daughter from a previous marriage, a shy girl with braces who clung to her mother's hand. They were married by November. I wasn't asked how I felt about it. I wasn't consulted, warned, or prepared. One day it was just me and my father navigating our grief together. The next, there were two strangers living in our house, sleeping in the bedroom where my mother had died, eating off plates my mother had picked out on our family trip to Portland. I want to be honest about something here, because I've seen comments on stories like mine where people ask why the parent didn't protect their child. My father wasn't a monster. Not at first. He was a broken man who made a terrible decision out of loneliness, and then spent the next 14 years doubling down on that decision because admitting it was wrong would have meant admitting he'd failed me. Weak people don't always look weak. Sometimes they look like Gerald Sinclair, 6'2", corner office at Pinnacle Insurance Group in Charlotte, North Carolina, firm handshake, confident voice, utterly spineless when it came to his second wife. Diane was strategic. She didn't push me out all at once. She did it in inches. First, it was redecorating. My mother's photos came off the walls, replaced by Diane's abstract art prints. Then it was activities. Peyton needed ballet lessons, voice lessons, horseback riding. The budget was tight, Diane said, so my piano lessons had to go. Then it was space. Peyton needed a bigger room for her growing wardrobe. My room, the one next to my parents' bedroom, was bigger. Would I mind switching? I minded. But my father said it would mean a lot to him if I could be flexible. So I moved into the smaller room at the end of the hall, the one with the window that faced the neighbor's fence, instead of the backyard oak tree I used to climb with my mother. Every time I lost something, Peyton gained something. And every time, my father looked the other way. Not because he didn't see it, because seeing it would have required him to act. When I turned 16, Diane convinced my father to take out a second mortgage on our house. She said it was for renovations, a kitchen remodel, and a new master bathroom. My father agreed because my father always agreed with Diane. What I didn't learn until years later was that the renovations cost $60,000, but the second mortgage was for $120,000. The extra $60,000 went into an investment account in Diane's name. She was already planning her exit strategy, building a financial cushion with my father's money and my mother's equity. Our house had been paid off. My mother had made sure of that with her life insurance payout. Diane took that security and leveraged it. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. The real fracture happened when I was 18, the same year I found the documents. I was applying to colleges. UNC Chapel Hill was my first choice. Close enough to home that I could keep an eye on things, but far enough that I could breathe. I needed my financial information for the FAFSA, so I went into my father's home office to find his tax returns. What I found instead was a folder labeled Sinclair Family Trust. My mother had a trust. I didn't know this. Nobody had ever mentioned it. The folder contained the original trust document, drawn up by an attorney named Howard Patel, in 2015, 1 year before my mother died. The trust held $240,000 in investments and savings, with me, Elara Sinclair, named as the sole beneficiary. My father was listed as trustee, responsible for managing the funds until I turned 21. I turned the pages with shaking hands. Behind the trust document were bank statements, monthly withdrawals, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, $12,000 in December of 2021, noted as holiday expenses. In total, over 7 years, $163,000 had been withdrawn from my trust. I was 18 years old, sitting on the floor of my father's office, with papers spread around me, and I could barely breathe. $163,000 of my mother's money, gone. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I was 18, not stupid. I photographed every document with my phone. Every page, every statement, every withdrawal. Then I put the folder back exactly where I found it and walked out of that office with a plan forming in my mind that would take me the next 10 years to execute. That's right. I waited 10 years. Some revenge is served cold. Mine was frozen. Here's what I did in the decade between finding those documents and standing at that podium. I got into UNC Chapel Hill on a full academic scholarship, no thanks to my father, who never once asked about my applications. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance. I got a job at a wealth management firm in Charlotte, working my way up from junior analyst to senior portfolio manager. I passed the CFA exam on my first attempt. I bought my own condo at 25, a modest 2-bedroom in South End that I furnished with things I chose myself. And quietly, methodically, I built my case. I hired an attorney named Candace Okafor. She was a trust litigation specialist, with a reputation for being relentless. I showed her the photographs. She reviewed them, cross-referenced the withdrawals with public records, and within 3 months she had assembled a case that was, in her words, overwhelming. The withdrawals were not used for my benefit. The $5,000 monthly pulls coincided with payments to Peyton's private school tuition at Providence Day School. The $12,000 December withdrawal matched a receipt for a Cartier bracelet purchased at South Park Mall, a gift from my father to Diane. The $8,000 transfers went directly into Diane's personal investment account, the same one funded by the second mortgage. My father had been stealing from me to fund his wife's lifestyle and her daughter's education, while I worked part-time at a frozen yogurt shop to pay for my own textbooks. You might wonder why I waited so long. Why not confront him at 18? Why not sue at 21 when the trust matured? Because I wanted more than money. I wanted the truth to land in a place where it couldn't be spun, denied, or whispered away. Diane was careful about image. Everything she did was calculated to maintain appearances. The charity work, the luncheons, the Instagram posts about family and gratitude. She had built a public persona of generosity and grace. I wanted to dismantle it in public, on her own stage, in front of the people whose admiration she craved most. Every year, Diane hosted the Sinclair Foundation's Spring Luncheon. It was a fundraiser for children's literacy, which would have been admirable if it weren't primarily a vehicle for Diane's social ambitions. 200 guests, most of them Charlotte's business and philanthropic elite. My father always gave a speech about family values. Diane always wore something designer. Peyton always helped with the silent auction, and I was never invited. Not once in 14 years. This year, I didn't need an invitation. I bought a table. 10 seats at $1,500 each. I brought Candace, my attorney. I brought 2 colleagues from my firm. I brought my best friend Maya, who had listened to this story unfold over a decade of late-night phone calls, and I brought a flash drive. The luncheon was held at the Ballantine Hotel on the first Saturday of April. I arrived early. Diane was at the entrance greeting guests in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent. She saw me and her smile didn't waver, but I noticed her fingers tighten around her champagne glass. "Elara," she said. "What a surprise." "I bought a table," I said. "I hope that's all right." She couldn't say no. Not in front of her guests. "Of course," she said. "How wonderful of you to support the cause." I smiled and walked past her. My father was near the stage, adjusting his tie. He looked older than I remembered, thinner. The confidence I'd grown up watching had calcified into something brittle. When he saw me, he froze. "Ellie," he said. He hadn't called me that in years. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting children's literacy," I said. "Isn't that what this is about?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew. Not the specifics, but he knew something was coming. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he'd had when my mother's coat was hanging by the door. The look of a man who knows a reckoning is overdue, but hoped it would never arrive. The luncheon proceeded normally for the first hour. Salad course, keynote from a local educator, video about the foundation's impact. Then it was time for the family remarks. Diane took the stage first, delivering a polished speech about community, generosity, and the importance of investing in the next generation. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Then my father stood to speak. He talked about Rebecca, my mother. He actually invoked her name, saying her spirit of giving lives on through this foundation. I watched him say those words and felt something cold settle in my chest. When he finished, I stood up. Diane noticed immediately. She stepped toward the microphone as if to introduce the next segment, but I was already walking. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor. 200 people turned to watch me. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like to say a few words. My name is Elara Sinclair. Gerald is my father. Rebecca was my mother." A murmur rippled through the room. Most of these people didn't know I existed. Diane had been so thorough in her erasure that to Charlotte's social scene, Gerald Sinclair had one daughter, Peyton. My father stood up from his seat. "Elara, this isn't the time." "Actually," I said, "this is exactly the time. You just mentioned my mother's spirit of giving. I think the people here deserve to know exactly where her giving went." I opened the folder Candace had prepared. I didn't read every document. I didn't need to. I read the key numbers. $240,000 held in trust for my mother's only biological child. $163,000 withdrawn by the trustee over 7 years. $0 spent on the beneficiary's education, housing, or well-being. 100% spent on the trustee's stepdaughter's private schooling, the trustee's wife's personal investments, and luxury purchases. The room was silent. Not the polite silence of an audience listening. The stunned silence of people recalculating everything they thought they knew. Diane stood frozen near the stage. Her cream suit suddenly looked like armor that had failed. "That's not," my father started. "It's documented," I said. "Every withdrawal, every receipt, every bank transfer. My attorney has been reviewing these records for 2 years. A formal complaint will be filed with the Mecklenburg County Clerk of Court on Monday." I looked at Diane. "You spent 14 years making sure I was invisible in this family. You redecorated my mother out of existence. You redirected my inheritance to your daughter. You convinced my father that I didn't matter. And you hosted charity events for children's literacy, while your husband drained his own daughter's education fund." I set the folder on the nearest table. "But I'm not invisible anymore." Then I looked at Peyton. She was sitting 3 tables away, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. She was 25, the same age I'd been when I bought my condo and started planning this moment. But unlike me, she'd had every advantage. She'd had the room with the window facing the oak tree, the ballet lessons, the private school, the Cartier Christmas gifts. "I want to be clear about something," I said, still speaking to the room but looking at Peyton. "I am not angry at my stepsister. She was a child. She didn't choose any of this. The adults in this room are the ones who failed." Peyton's eyes filled with tears. I saw something in her expression that surprised me. Not shock. Recognition. Like she'd always known something was wrong but never had the language for it. Candace stood and distributed a single-page summary to each table. Key figures, dates, legal citations. Professional, thorough, devastating. My father sat back down. He didn't try to speak again. Diane was whispering furiously to someone I didn't recognize, probably her own attorney. The guests were reading the summary with the focused attention of people who realize they've been complicit in something ugly by association. I walked out through the main entrance, past the valet stand, past the fountain in the circular drive, and got into my car. Maya was already in the passenger seat. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. And for the first time in 18 years, I actually meant it. The aftermath came in waves. The first wave was legal. Candace filed the complaint on Monday as promised. My father's attorney responded within 48 hours, not with a defense but with a settlement offer. They wanted to return the remaining funds, approximately $77,000, plus interest, in exchange for dropping the claim. Candace advised me to reject it. The full amount was $163,000, she said, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus damages for breach of fiduciary duty. Under North Carolina law, a trustee who misappropriates funds faces personal liability, and the statute doesn't look kindly on parents who steal from their children's inheritance. We filed a formal lawsuit. Sinclair v. Sinclair. The Charlotte Observer ran a brief item about it in their business section. That was all it took for the second wave. The social wave hit Diane hardest. Within a week, she was removed from the board of 3 nonprofit organizations. The Sinclair Foundation Spring Luncheon was permanently canceled. Her Instagram went private. Two of her closest friends, women she'd been lunching with for a decade, stopped returning her calls. My father's firm placed him on administrative leave, pending an internal review. It wasn't directly related to my case, but when your name appears in the newspaper next to the words misappropriated trust funds, your employer tends to ask questions. 3 weeks after the luncheon, Peyton called me. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in over a year, and our relationship had always been complicated at best. "Elara," she said. Her voice was small. "Can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop in Plaza Midwood, neutral territory. She looked different from the girl I'd grown up with. Thinner. Tired. The polish was gone. "I didn't know," she said. "About the trust. About any of it." "I know," I said. "I told you that at the luncheon." She shook her head. "No, I mean I didn't know about a lot of things. I didn't know about your piano lessons being cut so I could do ballet. I didn't know about the room switch. I thought you wanted the smaller room. That's what Mom told me." "Your mother told you a lot of things," I said. Not unkindly, but honestly. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. "She's been lying to me too, Elara. About my biological father. About money. About everything. Finding out about your trust made me start looking at my own life. And I don't like what I'm finding." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me, the part that had spent 18 years being invisible, wanted to say welcome to the club. But another part, the part my mother had raised, the part that still believed in decency, reached across the table and put my hand on hers. "We'll figure it out," I said. She nodded. "Okay, I don't know what our relationship will look like going forward. Peyton and I have 14 years of imbalance to untangle, and some of those threads are knotted in ways that might never come apart. But she reached out. That matters." My father sent me a letter. Not an email. A handwritten letter on his personal stationery. It was 3 pages long. I read it twice. He apologized. Not in the vague, self-serving way I'd expected, but specifically, he named what he'd done. The money, the neglect, the silence. He said my mother would be ashamed of him, and he was ashamed of himself. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, and wouldn't ask for it. I sat with that letter for a week. Then I wrote back. 1 paragraph. "I received your letter. I believe your regret is genuine. But regret doesn't undo 14 years of choosing someone else's comfort over your own daughter's well-being. I am not interested in rebuilding a relationship at this time. If that changes, I will let you know. Please respect this boundary, Elara." He hasn't contacted me since. I don't know if that means he's respecting my boundary, or if he's simply moved on. Either way, I have peace. And peace, I've learned, is worth more than closure. The lawsuit settled 4 months later. The full amount plus interest, plus Candace's fees. The total came to $219,000. I deposited it into a new account and didn't touch it for a month. Then I did something my mother would have loved. I set up a scholarship fund. The Rebecca Sinclair Memorial Scholarship, administered through UNC Chapel Hill, awarded annually to a first-generation college student from Mecklenburg County. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl from West Charlotte who wanted to study engineering. I kept enough for myself to feel secure, but I didn't need the money to feel whole. I'd built my own life, my own career, my own sense of worth, without a single dollar from that trust. Getting it back was never about the money. It was about the principle. It was about saying, out loud, in front of witnesses, that what happened to me was wrong. Some people have asked me if I regret doing it publicly, if I could have handled it privately, through lawyers and mediators, without the luncheon, without the spectacle. Maybe. But here's what I know. Diane thrived in private. In private, she could rewrite history, control the narrative, smile for the cameras while dismantling my inheritance behind closed doors. The only language she understood was public consequence. And for 14 years, she'd been immune to it. I don't regret a thing. Building a life after something like this is strange. You'd think the hard part would be the confrontation, the lawsuit, the public exposure, but the hard part is actually the quiet that comes after. The Saturday mornings when there's no battle to plan, no evidence to gather, no anger to fuel you forward. You're just a person sitting in your condo with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out who you are without the fight. I'm still figuring that out. I go to work. I see Maya on weekends. I call Peyton sometimes. We're learning each other slowly, without Diane and my father as intermediaries, and it turns out we have more in common than either of us expected. She likes jazz. So do I. She hates cilantro. So do I. Small things, but they add up. Last month, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in 3 years. I brought yellow tulips, her favorite. I sat on the grass and told her everything. The trust, the luncheon, the lawsuit, the scholarship. I told her about Peyton reaching out, about the letter from my father, about the quiet. I think she would have been proud. Not of the revenge, but of the refusal to stay invisible. My mother was a gentle woman, but she was not weak. She made sure I'd have a safety net even after she was gone. The fact that it was stolen doesn't change her intention. She loved me enough to plan for a future she wouldn't see. If you're watching this and you've ever been erased from your own family, treated like an inconvenience, made to feel like you don't belong in your own home, I need you to hear this. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. The people who made you feel that way were protecting their own comfort at your expense, and their comfort is not your responsibility. Your story is not over. You get to write the ending. And sometimes the best ending isn't forgiveness. Sometimes it's a boundary so clean and so final that it sets you free. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have exposed them publicly at the luncheon, or would you have handled it privately through the courts? Comment public if you would have done what I did, or private if you'd have kept it behind closed doors. I genuinely want to know. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.